All right, so the title of our discussion today is Beyond the Scale, comprehensive approaches to sustainable weight loss. All right, so let's set the stage for our discussion tonight. I can imagine that this might be part of your story or maybe someone you love. Stepping on the scale once again, hoping for that number to change, hoping for that miracle, but instead feeling that overwhelmed feeling of disappointment. If that is you, 80% of patients regain that weight back within a 2-year time frame. I think there's a better way to weight loss, one that doesn't require to give up some of your favorite foods or lose your sanity. 12% of Americans are considered metabolically unhealthy. This was a study 5 years ago, and this is epidemic. It really is. Again, if this is you, you're not alone. So, a brief intro about me. I'm a telemed provider. Mm, I've been providing care for patients here for the last 5 years. And I was once kind of siloed into treating hypertension, diabetes, high cholesterol with like a different diagnostic approach and treatment. And instead, I've been trying to switch to more being weight centric focus because what I realized is that treating diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol with like a different approach and treatment wasn't really working. And what I needed to do instead was treat obesity as a disease. And that's what it is. If we treat obesity as a disease, we often get a lot of improvement, a lot of those downstream issues, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, cardiovascular disease, etc. Most people, though, Google their way to weight loss. Most people Google their way to weight loss. This is what I hear from a lot of my patients. They try a diet, they lose weight, and then they regain it back, right? Or maybe they lose some weight, they regain it, but they don't feel totally confident that what they're doing is going to be sustainable. And in a world obsessed with instant results and perfect bodies, it's really easy to feel overwhelmed when you don't reach your goals. So this is probably what maybe you've done or something similar in Instagram or TikTok. Or maybe you do go to your doctor and you might get the 10, 15-minute visit. You go from the big waiting room to the small waiting room. They come in there, they're furiously typing away on their computer, and you don't really feel heard. Or worse, you're just told, eat less, and can anyone fill in the blank? Move more, right? You don't really feel heard. 1.3%, 1.3% is the people who can start on a medical therapy for weight loss and are started on one. If this was true for, say, cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, I think this discussion would be held at a much higher level, right? We're really failing patients with excessive weight and obesity. If we're leaving 98.7% of patients untreated. So again, maybe this is you. Maybe this is why you've come here because you don't feel adequately heard or you haven't been given the right therapies to help you out. And I believe that you don't need to feel confused or ignored with some of your health concerns, especially when it comes to excessive weight. It doesn't have to be that way. So to understand the real enemy behind excessive weight, there is a problem with adipose tissue. I'm sure you guys would agree. And did you know that adipose tissue is actually an organ? It's not a physically inert substance. It's producing hormones, it's integrating signals coming from other tissues, etc. 90% of the risk of cardiovascular disease comes from these 9 modifiable risk factors. Smoking, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, psychosocial factors, consumption of fruits and veggies, alcohol, and physical inactivity. Uh, Fairly basic stuff here, right? Easier said than done, though. But what you can see here is kind of the central theme is obesity. I think if we treat obesity as a disease that it is by working on physical activity, nutrition, we're able to improve high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, etc. Cardiovascular disease still remains the number one killer in the United States for both men and women. And in my bias is that it's fairly preventable, especially when we're talking about early cardiovascular death. Of course, if you live long enough, you're going to brush against cardiovascular disease at some point. But obesity is a huge modifiable risk factor because it also affects those other risk factors for heart disease. I was really surprised by the fact that 40% of malignancies, the fancy word for cancers, are obesity related. There is a lot of hormonal complications from obesity, and that leads to some of these cancers. So there's the metabolic complications of obesity. There's even cancer associated with obesity. And it goes well beyond that of the physical. I'm sure either you or someone you know can attest to the fact that there's a psychosocial implication of obesity that goes well beyond just what it's doing to the body inside and out. There's that constant shame and stigma. Oftentimes, patients, again, don't really feel heard when they go to their doctors. They don't feel like their friends or family who don't deal with that truly understand what it's like to be in your body. One of the worst things I think that has happened is that obesity has been seen as a disease or an issue of laziness or gluttony. And I'll be the first to tell you that's not the fact. People are saying that just don't quite understand comprehensively what obesity is. And we'll talk more about how we're going to address that. But again, one of the main takeaways is obesity is a chronic, relapsing, and treatable chronic disease. And then we live in a world filled with quick fixes. I'm sure you guys can attest to that. And those simple stories through TikTok and Instagram, they sell really well to us. We are quick to believe them. But I believe a truer health requires a deeper understanding. One of the problems is when you see people on TikTok or Instagram as they make these simple claims. Seed oils are the devil, carbs are going to cause diabetes, meat's going to cause cancer, and then fat's going to cause heart disease. And you're like left with what? Cardboard? I don't know. Like, what can you eat at that point? And there's like a lot of seemingly contradictory information as well. And I want to take just a quick tangent on some of the confusion around nutrition research. Because let's face it is kind of confusing. You hear one thing from one person and then the opposite thing from the other person. And there's a reason for that. A lot of these health experts are not commenting on the quality of studies that they're using to back up their claims. And that makes it really confusing. Who do I believe? There's a few reasons for that in nutrition research. And we'll just take a few moments to kind of take a tangent on this. The first is called the healthy user bias. This is one reason that makes nutrition research really confusing. So for example, a study might find that a low-carb diet leads to a lot of great health outcomes. Not to mention that those low-carb diet participants were also exercising, they stopped drinking so much, and maybe they got better sleep. And so what that does, it makes it hard to generalize one intervention, aka like a low-carb diet, when you're also practicing some of these other healthy practices. Or how about correlation versus causation? This is an actual infographic, and it's showing that as per capita cheese consumption rises, so does the number of deaths related to being entangled by your bed sheets. I kid you not. It's like a real correlation. But does something with cheese then lead to being entangled by your bed sheets? Like, you guys probably not going to go and have a slice of Swiss cheese tonight with this. Or how about like a study that finds that green tea is associated with higher body fat percentage? Is that a correlation or a causation? Is the green tea causing the high body fat percentage, or is there just a connection there? In order to actually find a causal role for a therapy, we have to do what's called a randomized clinical trial. We have to kind of piece apart placebo effect and actual therapy. Thirdly, there's something called confounding variables. The number of churches in a given population is associated with the number of murders. It's true. It's true. But what's the confounding variable there? It's population, right? Population is the third variable that leads to both more churches and, well, more murders because there's more people. In nutrition research, we may see that socioeconomic status, income, right? Kind of affluency, that is related to better health. And it's because of better access to gyms and foods and medical equipment and doctors. And then finally is reverse causality. The number of firefighters at a fire is associated with the severity of the fire. And the firefighter is causing the severity of the fire or vice versa. So the reverse causality occurs when the cause and the effect relationship is swapped out. So in nutrition research, you might find that a study finds that people who eat less breakfast or skip breakfast tend to have higher body weights. And at first glance, it may be tempting to think that uh, the high body weight, or excuse me, the skipping breakfast causes the high body weight, right? But it's probably the opposite. Those who are overweight or have a weight related issue are the ones who are skipping breakfast to try to fix that. So the point here is don't trust everything you hear. Simple stories sell, especially on social media. When you have 30 seconds or 60 seconds to do a quick Instagram reel, and you got to have, again, to have a better understanding of truer health, you got to better understand where those studies coming from. The problem is that many people resort to these popular diets, though. They resort to Atkins, keto, Mediterranean, vegetarian, anyone else, any other kind of popular diets out there, carnivore. Anyone else want to name a few that you've heard? Ornish, Whole 30. And if that is you and you're doing that diet and it's working for you, I applaud you. I don't want you to stop doing that. I'm very nutrition agnostic. I don't care what you do as long as it's working for you. But most diets do turn into cupcakes, a one time or another. And the reason for that is you haven't really set up your lifestyle in a way that allows for more sustainability. You try to go from zero, say, fast food, you're running the kids around, you're just doing microwave meals to, let's say, Whole 30 or paleo. And the 30 days, you may or may not really be able to integrate these lifestyle habits over time. There's two reasons for this, why most diets fail, most of these popular diets. First one is what's called the optimal foraging strategy. And the second one is what's called ancestral mismatch. So a short word on each. Optimal foraging strategy. Simply stated, it is that our brains are hardwired to eat. To illustrate this, the average American eats 1.3 to 2.1 servings of vegetables a day. That includes tomatoes from ketchup and potatoes from French fries. Probably no surprise there. Up to 84% of calories are from ultra processed foods, and there's kind of a delineation of processed, ultra processed, but a lot of our calories in this standard American diet come from ultra processed foods. It's a long quote here. I'll read it to you, but I'll want to kind of come down to a thesis. Evidence is amassing that the nutritional content of processed food is not accurately conveyed to the brain. And this raises the possibility that how foods are prepared and processed beyond their energy density, how much calories are in there, and palatability, how tasty it is, affects physiology in unanticipated ways that could promote overeating and metabolic dysfunction. In other words, these ultra-processed foods that we're eating, our brain really doesn't know what to do with. The energy density of those foods are not adequately conveyed or communicated to the brain. The top sources of calories, again, to further illustrate this, for kids, it's going to be grains, pizzas, soda, bread, chicken nuggets, and pasta. For those of you who have parents, there's probably not a huge surprise there. Maybe it is. You're doing a lot better with the diet with your kids, and if so, that's great. As adults, we have jobs, we have to pay the IRS, we're paying gas, we're all doing these adult things, right? Adulting is hard. And yet we still eat like kids. The top 6 sources of calories for adults is much like kids. We have just swapped out pasta for alcohol, right? We eat a lot like kids. Again, if that is you, it's not your fault. The optimal foraging strategy states that our brains are hardwired, kind of these neural circuits are made so that our brains really light up when we see ultra processed foods. And then the idea of ancestral mismatch, which states that not only are our brains hardwired to eat super calorie dense foods, but we're in this environment of an obesogenic environment where food is bountiful, for lack of a better word. Dr. John Berardi of Precision Nutrition stated, if a healthy food is in your house or possession, either someone you love, you, or someone you marginally tolerate will eat it, right? Coworker brings in donuts every Wednesday and Friday, right? I would postulate that the opposite is true. And if an unhealthy food is in your house or possession, Either you, someone you love, or someone you marginally tolerate will eventually eat it. You can see that when how most diets fail when there's cookies in the break room and cupcakes that your spouse brings home, and there's apple fritter pies at every fast food joint. It seems like at every block on Winder Avenue or wherever Franklin Avenue is. I'm not from around here, so excuse me. Uh, how about this apple pie example? You guys will maybe relate to this. Back in 1800s, in order to make an apple pie, what you had to do is you had to have apples, right? So you probably had to have an orchard, or maybe your neighbor had an orchard. You got it from the farmer market or somewhere, and then you had to make the dough. In order to make the dough, what do you have to have? You had to have grain. You got to mill the grain. You got to have the sugar to make the dough. What I'm trying to point out here is it's a pretty effortful process to make something as calorie dense as like an apple pie. And it's probably reserved for very special occasions. What do we have in 2024? Well, again, we have an apple pie for $3.99 at every street corner. We have ancestral mismatch. And not only that, nowadays, you don't even need to get out of your sofa or get in your car. You could just press a few buttons and have that apple pie or McDonald's or fill in the blank of some ultra processed food delivered to you. But again, this makes sense. Our brains are wired to eat. We want to conserve calories. Again, we're paying taxes and doing adult things. And the last thing we want to do is make yet another diet choices. This is why most diets fail. So how do we start to unravel this problem in not a one size fits all solution? There's 4 pillars of obesity or excessive weight management: nutrition therapy, physical activity, behavior modification, and medical interventions. By and far, behavior modifications is the most overlooked, and medical interventions the most underutilized. Remember that statistic of 1.3% of the people who meet the criteria are started on a medical therapy. So a short word on both nutrition and medical interventions. We don't have time to talk about it all. These are some of the common questions I get from patients or that I hear. What's the best diet? Again, most diets fail, but we'll start to unravel this a little bit more. Here is a study of 115 patients with type 2 diabetes and obesity. They were randomized to either following a low carb or a high carb diet. So LC low carb, HC high carb. At the end of the 12-month study, this is 52 weeks, 12 months, what they found was pretty similar weight loss. So a low carb diet can work. A high carb diet can work. If there was a significant difference, we should see this, replicated over and over again in some of the studies. And these are a little bit me cherry picking, but it's for illustrative purposes mostly. How about the question of should I intermittent fast? Well, this was what's called a meta-analysis of 7 studies. It just means that this was a review of multiple studies all at one time. It was about 400 patients or participants. What they found was that there's 1 pound more weight loss over an average of 2-month time frame. So again, some studies show that it's more, some studies show it's less, but on average, it's about 1 pound more weight loss over 2 months. There's no difference in lean mass, fat mass, or BMI. Point here is that low carb, high carb diet can work. Intermittent fasting can work. 6 meals a day can work. So what's the linchpin here? What makes a big difference? I argue that adherence is king. This was called the A to Z trial. What they did is they looked at various diets: Atkins, low carb, zone, kind of higher protein, Weight Watchers. You guys all know what that is. You guys get the points, right? And then the Ornish, that's kind of high carb vegetarian. They then looked from top to bottom, you see more weight loss. So if you're above this line, that's weight gain. If you're below this line, you're losing weight. And then they broke up the participants in all of the diets according to how well they adhered to the diet, 1 being low adherence and 10 being high adherence. And what you found was a pretty clear linear relationship with higher adherence to the diet and more weight loss, regardless of what diet you follow. Because this line here, it seems like one big line, but it's actually all of these individual studies together. They still follow that relationship. They state that regardless of assigned diet groups, 12-month weight change was greater in the most adherent compared to the least adherent tertiles. And this is next sentence is really interesting. These results suggest that strategies to increase adherence may deserve more emphasis than the specific macronutrient composition of the weight loss diet itself in supporting successful weight loss. Macronutrient composition, high carb, low carb, vegetarian, etc. It doesn't matter. Adherence is what matters most. So take away point is, and this is a little bit meta, and again, I can't individualize this to each and one of you guys because everyone's different, but you have to consider what diet you could be most adherent to. In other words, what diet feels least restrictive for you. You will have to be restrictive or restrict something, have some level of restraint with your diet. But if that is very socially isolating, say your wife loves high carb and you're going to follow a ketogenic diet, or maybe carnivore and your wife's vegetarian, those diets are not going to mesh. You're not going to be sustainable with that. Or how about the question, do calories matter? I took just one class of physics, very fortunate just to have one. And I took a class on thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics states that we are not God. That's all it states. We cannot create energy. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. We swap out energy for calories. Calories in equals calories out. This is true. You can't dispute that, but it's often short-sighted and often why the recommendations just to eat less and move more doesn't work. Because there's a lot of things that influence energy in and energy out. This is not a static equation. We're not a bunch of numbers. We are socially dynamic creatures with jobs and aspirations and, faith structures, etc. There's a lot of things that influence how many calories we eat. We got appetite and hunger. These are actually technically a little bit different. Hunger is more that physical sensation, and there's a lot of different things that influence appetite. We actually have 20,000 neurons in our brain responsible for regulating our appetite. Social cues, I'm sure you guys can attest to that. Maybe it's where you're at or the smell of, something you think of like grandma's cooking and that makes you hungry. Time in the day, genetics play a huge role. You actually look at the genes that are responsible for obesity, and maybe you could think of hormones or fat tissue mutations or muscle. It's actually the genes in our brain that are responsible for a lot of the genetic inheritance of obesity. And this has been kind of published out of University of Washington. And then epigenetics, this is how genes get turned on and off. Childhood experiences and cultural factors. There's a lot more than this. And if we had a Facebook, relationship status, it would be it's complicated. This energy inside of the equation is very complicated. And they're all influencing one another in a very dynamic way. Furthermore, as humans, we tend to underestimate the amount of calories that we consume by like 20 to 50%. You actually take trained nutritionists and you ask them to consider or predict how many calories that they eat, and they underreport by like 50%, even though they know a lot about diet. And we actually overestimate the amount of calories we burn from exercise by like 3 to 4 times as much. On the energy outside of the equation, it's equally confusing. We have something called basal metabolic rate. This is the amount of calories that it takes to keep the lights on, our brains from liver functioning or heart functioning. What dictates this is a lot of genetics, age, sex, and lean body mass. This is why a lot of shorter females have a harder time with, quote unquote, their metabolism. It's true. They don't have much lean mass, and thus their metabolic rate is lower. You see another 10, 15% is something called NEAT. That's non-exercise activity thermogenesis. NEAT. And this is, I'm expending more NEAT by standing than you who are sitting. This also includes fidgeting, taking the stairs, the non-structured training. Thermic effect of food. This can change by 10 or 20% depending on the quality of food that you're eating. This is how many calories that you burn by eating your food. So it actually takes calories to make calories, or I guess I should say utilize calories. So for example, if you eat whole almonds, you are going to spend more energy digesting those than almond butter. So the quality of your food also matters. This is why like a lot of ultra processed food has very low thermic effect. And then I think you guys might be surprised by this. I was. 5-10% of the amount of calories that we burn comes from exercise, structured exercise. And this is going to be a lot more if you're an athlete. But for most of us, it's only 5-10%. This is why you can't out exercise a bad diet. Exercise is important for other reasons that we'll talk about, though. So, what can we control here? Well, as I stated, there's a lot inaccuracy of counting your calories. It's almost futile to try to track how many calories you're burning. It's not helpful. Again, it's 300-400% difference there. And then, if you're trying to calculate how many calories you're eating as a result of how many calories you're burning, it's not helpful. Instead, I argue that precision matters more. And what I mean by that is building a routine, building a consistent routine that you can hit 90% of the time. I have some patients who do something completely different Saturday and Sunday compared to Monday, Friday. They might eat really well Monday through Friday, and then Saturday night's girls' night, and it's margaritas and pizzas and poor sleep. A lot of bad things happen after that. Not to say you can't have fun. What I'm saying here is that you got to build a consistent routine, and that's where sustainability comes into place. If you can't be sustainably, or you can't be consistent with a routine, then you're not going to sustain that. Also, consider setting up an environment for autopilot. And so, actual practice here is to take an inventory of your kitchen, do kind of an audit of your kitchen. Talk with your partner if you have one, or your roommate, or whomever, and talk about how to set up your environment for autopilot. What I mean by that, again, is this ancestral mismatch is we have a lot of hyperpalatable foods at our disposal. And if those are the easiest choices that we can make, if that's what's on our counter table, if that's what's in our purse or in our pantry, and that's the easiest thing, our bodies are going to try to conserve calories. We're going to try to opt for that. So I would highly consider, when you go home, talk to your spouse about that. Talk about what a grocery list looks like. How can you set up a system where this doesn't have to be a choice that you have to make day in and day out? Use your willpower to set up your environment where the healthy choices are the easiest ones to make. We could also influence our food quality, and that influences how much calories we burn by digesting our food. Higher volume of food, our brain actually regulates the volume of food, not necessarily the calories. And so when we increase the volume of our food, we feel full, we have satiety, and thus we eat less. We can also have some cognitive oversight on how many calories we burn through our non-exercise activity. A lot of that is under our subconscious control, but we can be considerate of like how many steps we get in throughout the day. That's one easy kind of proxy of how much calories you burn in a given day. Exercise is not so much work for burning calories. Like I said, 5-10% of the calories we burn comes from exercise. Exercise is important, one, for metabolic health. Even if you don't lose weight, if you exercise, you're more likely to have better metabolic health markers: blood sugar, blood pressure, cholesterol, just to name a few, right? Two is lean mass. Lean mass, again, is we're talking about metabolism, especially a lot of females, not to single you ladies out, but a lot of females say my metabolism is slow. I think I know what you mean by that. But if you build or preserve lean mass, aka muscle, you are more likely to have a higher metabolic rate. So that's the second reason that exercise is important, especially resistance training. Postmenopausal female really need resistance training. And then thirdly, I guess we could touch on this. Thirdly is going to be appetite regulation. Appetite regulation. Exercise, if you go from sedentary to exercise, you're more likely to get a better regulation or a better coupling with how much energy you're expending. I said that a little poorly, so let me restate that. When you're sedentary, your brain doesn't really do a good job with understanding how many calories it needs. It tends to kind of overshoot and you eat more than you actually burn. When you become more active, your brain better couples how many calories it needs and gets that much through the food. In other words, appetite regulation is important here, and that's how exercise works. A brief word on energy flux. So you have two different scenarios here. Person A, they might be, 5'2" female, lower lean mass, and they might be burning, say, 1,500 calories in a given day. And then she's eating, say, 1,000 calories a day. So she's in a 500 calorie deficit, and that's leading her to lose, let's say, a pound per week. Person B, let's say we got a 6'2" male. He's got some muscle. He used to be, let's say, a football player. He's got a lot more lean mass to play with. He is burning 3,000 calories and ingesting 2,500 calories. He's still in a 500 calorie deficit and losing 1 pound per week. But which of these two people do you think is going to be more sustainable with their weight loss? So, because we live in an obesogenic environment where food is plentiful, this person here is able to consume more calories and be successful with their weight loss efforts. And this is just the truth of the matter, especially why guys have a little bit easier because they have higher lean mass. They can eat more and move more. They have a higher energy flux, and that allows for more consistency in our environment. I really do feel for especially smaller females, shorter females, because you do have some difficulties with weight loss. There are some genetic factors there. I want to give you guys some practical things and not just talk about studies and boring philosophy. So I want to give you a few actual action items. The first one is going to be protein. This is where I often have patients start with 0.7 grams per pound of ideal body weight. Ideal body weight is very arbitrary, and it's mostly I use BMI to calculate this, but zero point 0.7 gram per pound is well beyond the RDA recommendations, and for good reasons. This was a study looking at a low protein or the control group here and a high protein diet. At the end of the study, they lost the same amount of weight, about 3.5 kilos, which is like 7 pounds if you're not from Europe. The high protein group lost more fat mass and gained more lean body mass or muscle. So protein is especially helpful for if you lose the same amount of weight, it's going to help you partition that weight coming from fat and gaining muscle. There's also what's called the protein leverage hypothesis, which more or less states that our brains prioritize protein in the diet, and it will continue to eat enough calories until it hits that protein threshold. And so this can lead to the overeating when protein's low in the diet. You just eat more and more until you get that protein threshold. It's one of the potential, I think one of many potential reasons that we're dealing with the obesity epidemic. This study here shows that as protein content in the diet goes from left to right, so there's a higher percentage of protein in the diet, the number of calories needed to hit that protein goes down. So said differently, increasing the protein in the diet as a percentage will help you feel fuller, will help you eat less, and help with satiety signals. Number 2 is fiber. So this really depends on many different factors. I know for a lot of people with GI issues, they don't do super well with high fiber, but evidence is amassing that higher fiber is usually associated with better weight loss outcomes. 25 grams on the lower end for females, 35 grams for the males, somewhere in between, sometimes higher, sometimes lower. If you don't know what this looks like in real food form, I do think it's worth tracking. There's a lot of free apps out there. You can track, if you're old school, on a piece of paper, do a quick Google query of, I had a cup of broccoli, how much grams of fiber is in there, and see what a few weeks looks like and try to get to that 25 to 35 grams a day. The thing is, our brain regulates food volume. When we eat, our stomach dilates and it sends signals to our brain to tell our brain that it's full. So by increasing fiber, we can help our brains say, hey, we got enough food here without necessarily adding a bunch of calories in. Another thing is NEAT or non-exercise activity, getting enough steps throughout the day. When we lose weight, our metabolism does turn down a notch, and we also subconsciously reduce the amount of twitching, and we want to move less. We just do a lot of things to conserve calories. What we could do is just Be more cognitively aware of this by getting more steps in the day. That's one really easy thing. 7 to 8,000 steps on the low end. That's kind of our minimal floor threshold that we're trying to get to. But there is evidence for individuals under 60 that up to 15,000 steps a day leads to more weight loss and health benefits. Um, I'll skip to this. Flexible dietary restraint predicts better and more sustainable weight loss. So they looked at studies showing that when you think really dichotomously about a diet or a weight loss plan, you put a moral label on a food as being good or bad, it actually paradoxically does the opposite effect. If you say that a food's bad, what does that do? It puts this subconscious reward on that food. It's like the parents who tell their daughter that they really don't like her boyfriend, and she just likes him even more as a result of that. And also makes you very food focused when you say, this food's good, this food's bad. I can only have this, I cannot have that. I work with my patients to come up with kind of a budget of discretionary calories. Discretionary calories are the amount of calories that are kind of your fun foods. What do you miss? Okay, you like chocolate, you like wine, you like that slice of bread. Okay, great. That may not fit into a diet where we're trying to lose weight, because if that's all you're eating, man, that's going to be really hard to be consistent with that. But let's think of like 10% of your calories, allotting it into that discretionary calorie budget. So for most people, 150, 200 calories, and maybe less if you don't have a lot of lean mass to begin with. This kind of makes it fun, right? If I told you that in order to save for retirement, you have to put all your discretionary income into an IRA, you're probably going to burn out pretty soon. If you never could go on a vacation, never could buy yourself a coffee, you never could do something fun. So we wanted to make it somewhat enjoyable, not lose our sanity, not give up our favorite foods, but we do need to be mindful. So I said 150, 200 calories. Not that you have to track calories, but you should be aware of how many of these kind of fun foods are going to your dietary budget. The self-monitoring, kind of two different flavors that we can use here. One is monitoring your weight. If you never monitor your weight and you weigh yourself a year later and you gain 30 pounds, that 30 pounds to lose is much harder than if you were to weigh yourself daily, weekly, or monthly. You see that you've gained a few pounds. All right. You go through a few week weight loss phase and you lose that weight. You kind of back to square one. Okay, great. Another flavor here of self-monitoring is tracking. I'm not saying you have to track your calories, but there needs to be some type of restraint on what you're eating because our brains lie to us. I want you guys to go home tonight and I want you guys to measure what an actual tablespoon of peanut butter is. And you'll be very sorely depressed. This study shows that as you track more food, you go from left to right, there's more percent weight loss going from top to bottom, is what that's showing. You don't have to do it every day. Most studies are showing 3 to 5 days a week is where you get most of the bang for buck. But if you find that you need to do it every day, great. That is what works for you. A word on medical interventions. The Obesity Medicine Association, they have stated that obesity is a chronic, relapsing, and treatable disease. I'm wondering if you've ever thought of excessive weight or obesity as a chronic relapsing disease. We've been told that's just a decision. And while it is, you have some responsibility and personal choice to make, it's not the disease of laziness. There's a lot of successful people who deal with excessive weight. Another point here is that there's not a one size fits all approach. We really need to personalize this to the person in front of us. Here are the indications. If you guys want to maybe take a picture of this or look at the recording again, these are the indications in which case we would use a medical therapy, aka medication, to help someone lose weight. This may be based off of BMI, waist circumference, body fat percentage, and the presence or absence of some complications. Complications being like diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol. Why would we even use a medication? Shouldn't this just be willpower? You're cheating if you're using medication, right? Not so much. Saying that using medication is cheating is like saying that, well, you drove here, you're cheating. Why didn't you walk? Why didn't you use your buggy, your horse? This was a study looking at a drug that we don't really use anymore. They saw about 5% weight loss at a 12-month time frame. When they combine that with a lifestyle recommendation, they got about 10% weight loss. And then when you combine that with meal replacements, you get 15% weight loss. Point being is that these things work together, they're synergistic. My patients tell me that when they start on a medical therapy, it takes the food noise away. They don't have to think about it as much. They stop living to eat and they eat to live. There's many different options for medical therapies. I will not go through each one. It is, again, kind of futile in a more general audience. And this is something that we personalize to the patient according to what they can't use, contraindications. Some of the other benefits that we're trying to get, whether that's, say, their focus is out of whack. Well, we might use Contrave. If they are dealing with insomnia, we're not going to use phentermine. If they have some headaches, we might use Qsymia. So there's a lot of different things that we can personalize this to. How long do you need to be on? Well, you should expect some weight regain when you stop the medication. This was a study, and they took patients and put them on 9 months of tirzepatide here, and they lost about 20% of their weight. They then broke up the participants. 300 took the placebo, and another 300 continued to take the tirzepatide. This is Mounjaro or Zepbound, if you've heard this on TikTok or Instagram. And the tirzepatide group continued to lose weight, whereas the placebo group regained half their weight back. You should expect weight regain because obesity is a chronic, relapsing, and treatable disease. If we did stop the blood pressure medication, what would happen? Blood pressure would go up. If you stop the diabetic drug, the blood sugar goes up. I will say, though, that as you really master some of the behavior modifications, the diet, the lifestyle, you may not need as much medication to continue or maintain that weight loss. You all right? Okay. I'm also utilizing some new technology in practice. Not a ton, but for people who can and want to use this, what it is, it's a genetic sample. And some of you guys are thinking, no way, you measure my genes. But it uses another kind of taboo word, AI, artificial intelligence, to look at these genes and then predict using a proprietary algorithm the right diet, lifestyle, and medical therapy that is most likely to be successful. Because when we do use medical therapies, there's a lot of trial and error as we try to figure out the right one for the patient. This test here does show a lot of promise. So when you look at people who lose 5%, 10%, 15%, 20% weight loss, people who were given a specific treatment in the dark blue were much more successful in that as compared to people who were just given kind of random therapy. So this helps us get to the right therapy right away. But we still need some more trials and evidence to support this. Real briefly, I just think that we need to expect delays. This is just part of the process where you're losing weight. You're going to plateau. Some things are going to happen, and we just got to plan for contingencies. We got to set realistic expectations. We'll talk about what that is. Set some small goals or milestones. There's a social accountability that goes along with sharing your goals with friends and family. They can help you stay accountable and also change your environment where those healthy choices are the easier ones to make. I think that, weight loss medicine is very multidisciplinary, meaning that we need to pull in different people from different professions to get you the right help, because it's not just hey, it's me, a one-man show, and I'm going to have all the answers. We really need to pull in a lot of experts. And planning for travel, I would say cruise ships are like the worst thing that can happen for weight loss unless you get norovirus. And then it's another story. A word on eating disorders is very common. There's some screening questionnaires there for considerations. It's something I ask my patients, much more common in females than males. Binge eating, nighttime eating, and loss of control eating and bulimia are actually a lot more common than you would think. And so I have some questions that I always ask my patients about that. I want to be respectful of your time, and I know we kind of went a little bit longer than anticipated. Briefly touch on a few things. Habit formation, again, you can't go from a diet 0 to 100. You got to make some strategic, that's a key word, strategic lifestyle changes, habit changes over time. And there's a process here. It utilizes what's called motivational interviewing to understand what the weakness is, work on 1 or 2 practices for 2 to 8 weeks. We measure the progress using subjective and objective markers, and then we rinse and repeat. Throughout all this, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and discouraged, and having a sense of body positivity works a lot better than feeling shamed or judged. Shame actually makes things worse. It actually does the opposite effect than what it's intended to do. So we want to promote self-acceptance of where you are while still trying to get to your goal. And the emphasis should not just be on your weight, but also your health, right? Are we just trying to get to a number? Because that number, I'll tell you, is very fleeting. The goalpost changes. I talked to a patient, they're 250 and they want to get a 200. You get them to 200. Now they want to be 180. And now they want to be what they're, in high school. I was like, well, the goalpost just keeps on moving. There's kind of fleeting happiness here. So we don't want to tie our self-worth to a particular number. To talk about healthy expectations, 0.5 to 1% weight loss per week is a healthy rate of weight loss. More than that, you actually run into risks of gallstones, for example, kidney stones, and just unhealthy eating patterns. So this is what I shoot for. So in my practice, how do we put this together? It's kind of a 3-phase plan. First is that initial consultation. For most patients, I have an hour long. And this is where we talk about your diet and your goals and what are the weaknesses that you're facing, your medical history. We order the labs, and then at our second appointment, we review those labs. We talk about what they mean, how we're going to put it together, along with the history. And then you get 30, 45-minute appointments, and I usually see patients every 1 to 3 months, especially in that first 6 to 12-month time frame. And that allows for us to build some motivation, to kind of go through that motivational interviewing, to talk about what habits we're going to pepper in with the right medical therapies, physical activity, behavior modification recommendations. But unfortunately, many people kind of live their status quo. They never get the right help that they really deserve. They're confused about their health. They don't have any clarity why they're still dealing with their weight issues. And I am also equally as frustrated. I see a lot of patients go from one provider to the other and not really get the answers that they need. But most research does support, I got to end on some happy slides here. Most research does support that 10 to 20% weight loss is very, very possible. It's difficult though. It is very difficult, especially getting there, but then also maintaining that weight loss. We live in an obesogenic environment and our brains are hardwired to eat. It's why most diets fail. But I think you need a guide. I think you need an advocate kind of in your corner fighting for you, kind of being that noisy backseat driver saying, hey, let's go here, let's go there, let's make this change, that change. I think you need someone to give you some clarity of why you don't feel your best and help you feel more fit and confident. So remember that sustainable weight loss is possible. It goes well beyond the scale. Don't get so tied to the number. Have some self-acceptance of who and where you are in your health journey. And I feel like you can't really flourish when you're so confused about your health. You're listening to TikTok and Instagram with seemingly contradictory advice. So I would love to be a support pillar for you guys. I know there's a lot of very trained other providers that are more in person here that would love to help you as well. Thank you so much for your time.